Asimbonanga Mandela tina laphe khona laphe hlezi khona.
In South Africa, we opted for what we call participatory democracy. It is a democracy where communities themselves are not sitting back being passive recipients of the goodwill of government.
No matter how difficult issues are, you need social dialogue.
Nedlac is a public entity. It was set up at the dawn of democracy in 1994-95, and it was seen as the place where trade unions, business organizations, community organizations, and government could come together to agree on new policies and new legislation.
We could still have all the legislation that we have. The question that we need to ask is, would we have buy-in on those policies if there was no social dialogue? And the answer is no.
Nedlac is democracy at work. It's participatory democracy. Nedlac is made up of 4 constituencies, that being government, business, labor, and civil society.
Any constituency at Nedlac can propose any policy.
Achieving consensus and building social compacts is not a demonstration of weakness. It is the very essence of who we are as South Africans. Today, the national minimum wage is here, and it is here to stay. And let it be clear that this national minimum wage did not arrive on a silver platter. There was a lot of struggle that was engaged in, and a lot of talking, negotiations that ensued. In this sense, the national minimum wage represents the triumph of cooperation over conflict, of negotiation over confrontation.
As a result of its introduction, took more than 6 million workers out of poverty. And for me, those are the real milestones that you can point at Nedlac.
Working together with President Ramaphosa, Nedlac developed and came up with a very, very beautiful framework of the Jobs Summit Framework Agreement, which was coming up with proposals of what needs to be done to improve our employment creation in South Africa.
We have brought business, labor, and government together to craft master plans for those industries that have the greatest potential for growth.
That is a direct product of Nedlac.
The social partners organized under Nedlac have been meeting, deliberating, and discussing a number of proposals over the last 2 weeks to find agreement on the principles of what they call a social compact on electricity.
There's an acknowledgement that Eskom has a role to play and that Eskom needs to be turned around, but there's also an acknowledgement that the private sector need to play a role in providing energy, particularly renewable energy.
This is a historic and unprecedented development in our country, since it demonstrates the commitment of all social partners to take the necessary actions and make the necessary sacrifices to secure our energy needs.
When we first saw COVID about to come to our shores, the social partners had the foresight to come together and say, we need to respond, and we need to respond comprehensively.
Businesses were affected. Some were closing down. Borders were closed. Exports were a problem. Workers were losing their jobs.
COSAT was meeting with the Minister of Labour every day to say, how do we give something on the table for those workers? And Labour raised its hand and says, why can't we look at the UIF, which is workers' money that you need to be used during difficult times. They said, we are raising our hands. We need to save life now. Almost 6 million people were beneficiaries of that one.
When we started with the work of COVID-19 and social relief, there was absolutely no proposal about any form of a grant that can be given to the unemployed and the poorest of the poor. We raised that proposal. Hence today, the unemployed and the poor can get a grant of up to 350 rands in South Africa.
The third issue was the question of the PPEs. And Nedlac came out and says, we know what other countries are doing. You need to provide this protective equipment, particularly for the frontline workers.
The Nedlac social partners have really believed that vaccinations is critical for economic recovery, because only then can we begin to move to some form of normalcy. And there has been very important partnerships forged at and through Nedlac. Firstly, in procuring and distributing vaccinations. There was a very important partnership established between the private sector and government to make sure that vaccines are accessible to all. Towards the middle of 2020, there was a recognition that South Africa needed an economic recovery and reconstruction plan to get out of the impact of the lockdown. The President, Cyril Ramaphosa, asked all the social partners to present their plans, after which Nedlac were able to pull them together into a series of short and long-term actions which would help our economy recover. And the President then announced this as an economic recovery and reconstruction plan. It is hoped that by being able to engage on these issues, build deeper understanding of these issues, that we'll be able to find collective and individual solutions.
Nedlac is also worried about a society that is blighted by the majority of people not working, young people, anything up to about 70% not even having a prospect of a job. Someone has to speak for them, and Nedlac provides a platform to bring those voices in so that you guys can be part of the solution.
Nedlac is central. It's one of the most important organizations outside Parliament and the courts that bring civil society into policy making.
Nedlac is not static as policy is evolving. So Nedlac continues to engage issues. And therefore you can say that in the process Nedlac itself is evolving. The issues which Nedlac dealt with 10 or 20 years ago are totally different from the issues which it's dealing with today.
Going forward in South Africa, trust and hope are very essential ingredients. One of the roles that Nedlac plays is building trust between social partners, which will enable us all to hope for a better future.